I'm Jeff Colgan. I'm Director of the Climate Solutions Lab, and it is my serious pleasure to introduce Francesca Whitehead, who is a Vice President at Fifth Wall, which is I'll let her tell you exactly about Fifth Wall, but what she does there is lead thematic work and executing deals across climate tech in both the United States and in Europe. And so she's working on all kinds of transactions, including companies like N0, SolarCycle, Voltaire, and Soli. Francesca herself was included in Fortune's 40 Under 40 and StartUp Basecamp's list of women driving the future of climate tech. So we are very proud that she is also a Brown alumna. She graduated in 2016 and received a BA in economics. She was born in Hong Kong and currently lives in New York City. And she started her career, as I understand, at Goldman Sachs in the natural resources investment banking group. And so I've asked her to talk for about 20 minutes or so, a little bit about what she does. But this is a combination kind of event where you will hopefully learn something about the substance of the material in terms of net zero real estate, but also have an opportunity, especially for the students in the room, to ask questions about Francesca's career path. And so without further ado, I'm turning the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. I feel like that's it sounds great when you put it on paper like that. But it's great to meet everybody, and thanks for coming. Just to give like a very quick, 30 seconds on Fifth Wall. It's a fund that was founded in 2016, and it's actually known historically for its prop tech side. So it's investing kind of across real estate and modernizing buildings. And about 3 years ago, they started a climate tech fund, and that's kind of where I sit within the organization. AUM, we have like 3 billion-ish, and we invest globally as well. So.
And you are not the only Brown alum at the firm, is that right?
No, I'm not. We actually had 2 people that recently left, and then there's also Michael New, no, he's not a Brown alum. We had 2 Brown alum that recently left, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
I know, it was 2 associates on the real estate team. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that just gives you room to hire more.
Exactly,
right?
Definitely. I kind of thought about segmenting this kind of little talk here about the problem of why it's such a big deal that we should decarbonize the real estate industry, and then segmenting the market into kind of different chunks within that, some solutions and the problems within those kind of different segments, and then finally the role of private capital, and then open it up for questions. Cool. So you can kind of see some of the framing about why this is a big problem on the slide here. So kind of investing to make the real estate industry net zero. So like, why do we even care about that? So there are kind of a couple reasons. Real estate is a huge industry. It's probably one of the world's largest. It's about 13% of US GDP. It's about $42 trillion in US capital markets, or $326 trillion if you look globally. So huge industry. And according to the UN, it's also one of the world's largest polluting industries. So it's responsible for about 40% of CO2 emission, just buildings, not including kind of industrial buildings, just regular buildings. It's 34% of global energy demand. That's more than any other industry, including transportation. And it uses 50% of the world's raw materials. So solving this big problem would solve a lot of the challenges when it comes to climate change. And also there's a lot of money that's already kind of surrounding this, and so it feels like there's kind of a lot of opportunity there. Despite kind of all of those big trends that I just kind of outlined, investing in decarbonizing the built environment still lags most other industries. So if you look from 2013 to 2019, $60 billion was invested into climate tech across all verticals. Only about $4 billion of that was into the built world. And then over the last 2 years, all climate tech dollars, only less than 5% of that went into real estate. So it's a little bit of an increase in the last 2 years, but still a fraction of what it should be based on the impact that industry could have. So there are a lot of people, a lot of different stakeholders that are now raising the alarm and kind of concerned about this and putting pressure on real estate to actually make a move to decarbonize. That's everyone from, there's new regulations, so the regulators are starting to make moves. Local Law 97 is a new regulation that came out in New York, and it will start taking effect this year and next year. There's also the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Bill, all of which has targets specifically on the built environment. Tenants, that's kind of another big demand driver as well. Residential and commercial tenants want buildings to be more energy efficient, they want cleaner buildings. In some cases, in some parts of the world, they're actually willing to pay a premium to have some of those benefits. And then kind of finally, capital markets are also putting pressure on real estate owners. That's everything from venture private equity to the public markets. A lot of us need to report on our GHG impact of our portfolio companies, which then trickles down to driving some of those companies to actually give us that info and puts pressure on them to also decarbonize. So it's not just kind of those three driving factors. You can actually see a lot of people within the real estate industry are actually starting to respond and starting to think about it, but it is incredibly difficult to decarbonize the built environment. So they are starting to do it, but there's lots of challenges before they'll actually hit their climate pledges that they've made. And a lot of those actually start to kick in 2030. But we, of course, need to start seeing that movement now if we're going to even have a chance of hitting those goals by 2030. And then kind of the final one, which is how I think about why this is so important. If you as an individual or any organization want to hit net zero, you've got to figure out how to decarbonize your building. We all live and are currently sitting in a building, so you can't claim to be a climate person without figuring out how to decarbonize the building you yourself are operating and living in. So if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, reducing your building's carbon footprint is the biggest way to do that, easiest way probably to do that. And overall, it's estimated that about $18 trillion needs to be invested over the next decade to make real estate carbon neutral. So this is obviously both a big challenge, but also a big opportunity. A lot of those first movers could actually become kind of leaders in the industry. And so that's kind of what makes me excited about it. And of course, like, I've dedicated my career to this, so of course I have to think of it as an opportunity. So walking through kind of different segments of the market here and potential solutions and challenges on both. So I split up the industry sort of into three categories, as you can see here. So first one is embodied carbon. Second one is operational carbon. And the final one is kind of climate resiliency. So embodied carbon, that makes about 33% of building kind of emissions. I define it as what is emitted before and after the building is operational life. So that would include things like, the materials. What is used? What are the raw materials used in the building to actually build it? How is that processed, refined? Where is it sourced from? How much waste or water is used to actually getting those materials to the building site? Then next chunk, construction. How efficiently is that being done? Is it automated? Is there waste being produced in that process? And then final chunk is end of life. What do you do when you demolish it? Are you recycling and upcycling those materials or just kind of sending it straight to landfill? Operational carbon, that's kind of the biggest chunk of emissions for buildings. That's about 67% of building emissions. That's all the emissions that occur whilst the building is being used. So some examples of that is energy use, water usage, recycling, the list goes on. And then the final chunk is climate resiliency. How do you actually monitor this going forward? And I think this is probably an increasingly important category as extreme weather events are becoming more and more frequent and more extreme in general as well. We have our winter storm coming tomorrow, perfect example. Would be great if people could predict that with much more accuracy and also the impact it will have on the building itself. Cool. And so, as I kind of outlined before, decarbonizing real estate is really complicated because there are global supply chains, there are different stakeholders. The building owner is the one that has to put things into the building, but the tenant's the one that gets the benefits. Kind of difficult to reconcile the two. These are really long-term assets. We can't just say, let's rip out the buildings and start again. What do you do kind of in the interim and in the meantime? So kind of walking through some of the potential solutions across all the different categories here. First one, you can start with embodied carbon. On the material side, those buildings are built with steel, marble, concrete, some wood. Older buildings might have some stone, brick. There's also windows, doors, furniture, pipes, all of that as well. And all of this requires materials, some of which are mined, others are kind of go through a refining manufacturing process. So we can't really just think about, let's stop mining, for example, because then we wouldn't have steel to actually build buildings. So some of the solutions and things you can invest behind to encourage the building to be lower embodied carbon would be clean steel production. Having better mining practices, like instead of using a diesel generator at a mining site, maybe use a battery and solar panels to power kind of all the equipment that's necessary. Using different type of mining drills, all of that. Using carbon negative cement, use recycled materials inside the building, like maybe recycled furniture. And the IRA actually has about $10 billion in tax credits that is targeted on clean building materials specifically. So there's a lot of kind of potential for people that are building out new buildings. And then next chunk that I chatted about was on the construction side. So one of the big challenges with construction is that it actually has lagged in productivity and development relative to pretty much every other industry. So if you look at how it compares to the broader economy, it's actually 32% less productive than the general economy. Just kind of shows that there's a lot of opportunity to improve that productivity and therefore waste kind of associated with the two. So just to give some concrete examples of solutions kind of in the construction space, one is digital twinning of a building, so that you have better information of what actually went into the building, what's currently in the building, where exactly they sit within a building. Because a lot of people, once they've constructed a building, won't know, like, okay, the pipe is actually exactly there on a building, for example. And that's what you need if you want to extract that value at the end of life. Others are use a robotic arm to paint versus a human. Using modular and prefab construction, that's sort of the biggest segment within that space, I would say. Finally, end of life of the building. So knowing, like I said earlier, knowing where your building materials are, knowing where the heat pump is, knowing exactly which window is actually a solar panel window, all of that is information you need to know where the value is that you can then resell, melt it back down, all of that information, which is kind of missing in a lot of existing buildings. There's other things like selling your furniture so that people can buy that secondhand. Marketplaces for all the recycled metals in the building as well. So in kind of those first two categories that I chatted about there, you can't really change the embodied carbon for existing buildings, right? Construction materials, that's for new builds. So what do you do for those existing buildings? That's a whole separate category. And then for new buildings, it is also a very high risk for building something with a new construction method, with a new material, because what if it doesn't end up being as strong as existing materials, and then you as a developer have to either replace it, fix it, that's super expensive, and it's also really dangerous for all the tenants in the building. So there's just a lot of other considerations besides just reducing the embodied carbon of the building for those developers. Then the operational carbon piece. This is the broadest category, of course, and where I spend the bulk of my time and what I think about mostly on a day-to-day. But just to kind of give it even more segmentation within that, so it's you can reduce energy usage in the building. So that could be, let's retrofit solar panels, EV chargers, batteries, and heat pumps into existing buildings. Make sure that they're included when you're building a new building, because it's a lot cheaper putting them in at the beginning than retrofitting it after, and a lot easier as well. Modernize the grid, making sure that we're adding renewables to the grid, but then also making sure that we won't have things like blackouts because there's no kind of load balancing on the ongoing basis. That's called kind of demand response. Improving the insulation and energy efficiency of buildings would reduce kind of the energy needs as well. LED lights, having lights that turn off automatically, building automation systems, insulating the pipes, that's kind of a big one because that's where actually a lot of waste comes from in a building. And often actually a lot of the solutions I just outlined actually have the added benefit of increasing the comfort for tenants. And so maybe it could increase the amount that you could charge tenants. It gives the building also usually a more modern feel if it has all of those different components. Other ideas and solutions would be managing water usage better. So that could be more efficient flushing and other things as well. And then there's also building recycling and composting. And there's plenty of others too. But then the biggest challenge with reducing operational carbon is you can't control what a tenant does in the building. How do you know if the tenant won't open a window whilst the heater is on? There's a very little you can do about that because you can't tell them not to do that. Are they using single-use plastic in the building? Again, something you can't really control and stop them from doing. So what do you do as the building owner to manage that? Some of them are coming up with solutions around incentivizing their tenants, but really it's just kind of individuals need to just be best actors in that regard, and that can take regulation, but it's unclear exactly how you manage that. You can't control people and stop them from doing those sort of things. So then another one, like which I mentioned earlier as well, you as a building owner often have to pay for these upgrades to meet the regulations, like Local Law 97, for example. You as a building owner have to meet certain energy efficiency requirements in New York by the end of this year, otherwise you get taxed. but you're not the one benefiting from those cost savings. So it's just a pure outlay of cost for you. The tenants are the ones benefiting for that, but they don't tend to pay for those upgrades, especially if it's a rental building. So how do you fix that problem of having the incentives going misaligned here? And then the final category was climate resiliency. So that's everything to kind of help you manage and predict, think about your supply chain, and managing the risk, which is just going to be inevitable for all of us. And so that's everything from better insurance that's targeted by different clients and buildings, improving grid software and other software just to enable all of these different solutions and managing them inside your building, because we just added a lot of new tech to something that traditionally didn't have a whole lot of tech. So how do you manage all of that on an ongoing basis? Cool. I think that's everything from the slide side. But the final segment to chat through is just on the public-private partnership side and kind of the role that private money has in broader market. I think every category of money has a different use case and has different strengths and weaknesses. Climate change is a global problem. Everyone's going to be affected. We all have to work together to solve this problem, and everyone has different kind of roles to play. So for a nonprofit, the things that they can invest in and put money behind when they don't have returns thresholds just looks very different than what I can in venture. Also, what's different from private equity, what's different from public markets. Also, what philanthropy and nonprofits in general can do around also somewhere like Brown for educating people. That's something that private capital can't really do. So I think everyone just needs to work together to solve this super complicated problem. And then the final chunk for private money is, of course, the people, the corporates that end up purchasing all of these solutions. And so when I think about my role and what venture dollars can do, it's around scaling these novel new technologies as fast as possible. And then from there, I require other people to kind of take the baton. There's very little I can do to force someone to buy that afterwards. So that's kind of where I think private capital has its role.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Francesca. And you've laid out a lot of really useful things, and the slides were really were spot on. So I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you have. I have a bunch of them, but I will sort of prioritize yours over mine. So at any point when you have questions, please just jump in. Yeah, Alex.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so from my takeaway, I think you're saying that it's easier to build new builds with renewable resources and materials, and it's harder to retrofit. But obviously there's a swath of buildings that already exist, so what's the opportunity? I guess I was writing to myself, how do you pitch this to investors? And you started touching upon that at the end with private capital. And I don't know if there's an opportunity to incentivize in terms of subsidies, and maybe there's an incentive that doesn't come from a tenant or a buyer, but it comes from a government organization or another sort of firm. And I just wanted to explore that specifically, how do you present this to investors privately while making it seem like a benefit to the public as well too? And I could go into the other things, it was misaligned incentives, but I'll start there.
Yeah, so there are companies that tackle specifically on the retrofitting side. Some of them are venture-backed, so Soli and Voltaire, which was mentioned in the beginning, both of them retrofit a lot of these solutions for residential homes specifically. So Soli does it for solar panels, batteries, and EV chargers across Europe, and Voltaire, and that's based in the Netherlands, and Voltaire does it for heat pumps, and they're based in the Czech Republic. But for both of them, they have kind of a whole suite of installers that's for both of them aren't actually their employees, but they have installers that are consultants that they work with, subcontractors, and then they go and install in the homes, but they have to find all those residential homeowners and all of that. And that's kind of the tech enablement piece. But there are also your local installers too, which are just as effective. And so right now there are tax incentives through the IRA. So I was just pulling up the stat as
the 10 billion, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
There's 10 billion on green building materials, home energy efficiency upgrades. There's about 9 billion worth that you can claim. The thing that I find kind of frustrating around a lot of those claims and tax credits, the cap money is there, you still need to know how to claim them. And so it's tax incentives for the individuals, and that's sort of why those tech-enabled platforms like the Solis of the world are helpful, or the Sunruns in the US, that's the example, because they help you with that process on the back end, as well as the front end. I'll find your installer, I will help you pick the solar panels that suits your home. It's obviously a no-fuss solution to that as a homeowner. The side that is still a bit not as strong and not as developed, it's more developed in the US and the rest of the world, is on the commercial side. Commercial buildings are super complicated, they're all different. What do you do for this building versus a factory? It's very different heat pumps, solar panels, EV chargers that are necessary for those. So that is kind of a segment that's still growing and still pretty new. There aren't as many solutions there.
Thanks for that. I can take a follow up. Yeah.
Yep.
And within that, do you think then that what is incentivizing the change the fastest? It seems like regulations hasn't really been spurred by other things yet, and you mentioned like incentives matter too.
Yep.
What do you think is really driving catalyzing this change?
On the catalyzing and change bit, I think it's different by region, sector, all of that. But if we're going kind of specifically in New York for any building that way, I do think that stick is pretty important for driving a lot of that change. I will be curious how it actually plays out. I have a feeling that there just aren't enough people that physically will go do the retrofits. Like there aren't enough installers in New York City or in the region to fix all of the buildings that need fixing. So we'll see if they give some, time delays and things like that. But it is a very important thing for driving those changes because it is really hard to do for existing buildings. Like the New York building stock is really old. The building I live in New York, it's an energy efficiency D rating. And I'm like, that's not great. And that's actually probably the best building I've lived in terms of energy efficiency rating. Like it actually stays warm if I don't keep the heat on at night. Like that's crazy. So that's like a very simple way of fixing it. And even other things, right? In New York, because it's all multi-stacked, like it's multi-story buildings. So for heating, because of these old buildings, there's a boiler in the basement that the building owner pays for all of that heating. And you, as the person living in each apartment, can't control the temperature in your own apartment. And so it's just heated. Once it hits October through to March, your building is just heated at the same temperature. So if it's too hot, you open the window because that's the only way to cool down your own apartment. So there's a lot that needs to get done in New York, and I don't think anyone has a good idea about how to do it. The one thing that I've seen, and that's like my own personal opinion, is that the regulation was around, it was announced 2-3 years ago at this point. I think it was 2 years ago. So there's been a lot of time for people to think about it, and a lot of them didn't until the last second. And so they're now like, oh my God, it's so hard, and it is so hard. But there was also time given before a lot of those things were coming into place. So again, we'll see how it all plays out. I think for individuals on the incentive, the IRA stuff is helpful, but also I think individuals are faster moving. The only stakeholder you care about is yourself, right? That's the only person that matters. So if it's your own house, you can install even if it doesn't make financial sense just because you want to. So it's just a super different set of considerations. And then when I think about industrial buildings, you care about uptime in your factory. If you have solar panels on your roof and like suddenly uptime goes away because there's no sun, that's a big problem for you because it would impact your top line revenue. So those are kind of additional considerations. And also then your investors will probably come at you with, because you have to have fiduciary responsibility. So if you have that top line revenue hit, they can actually sue you for doing things like that to your building and reducing your top line revenue on purpose. Yeah, so.
That's great. I'm going to jump in with a question and then I'll take some more. You mentioned earlier in your talk about Fifth Wall does reporting of its own sort of emissions profile from the portfolio that it has. And so I wondered whether you could just say a little bit more in terms of 3 questions. What do you report? Why do you report it? And here I'm taking for granted that you think it's the right thing to do, but there's probably also another motivation. And then to whom do you report? So
yeah, so it was
what, why, and to whom?
Yeah, I was like, I'll make sure I don't forget. So we actually require all of our portfolio companies to give us information. And so it's everything on their water usage, energy usage, but we do full ESG reporting. So also like the number of women on your board, number of women on management teams, as a full organization, number of people of color, all of those. We actually require the ESG side, and the G would be, do you have adequate cybersecurity things in place so that people's data can't get stolen? So we require reporting on all of that. We are actually a B Corp ourselves at Fifth Wall. So B Corp is an organization like Ben & Jerry's is a B Corp, for example. It actually has pretty strict and it's a pretty heavy lift for getting yourself B Corp certified, and we did that a couple of years ago. So that's also why we add to our need of reporting, because otherwise we can't maintain our status. And then how we do it, we're actually going through it right now for our 2023 report. We send out questionnaires to all of our portfolio companies, and then all of that data gets gathered into kind of one of the ESG platforms that we use, and they'll kind of collect all of that data, collect all of that data and come out with kind of stats for each country or break it down however we want to see. And it is actually our first full year of doing it for every single portfolio company. We used to just do it for ourselves. And so now it's will give us kind of more information on year-to-year trends as well, once we've started gathering that full information. And to whom? It's to our LPs, our limited partners. They're the people that invest in our fund. And so someone like Brown University's endowment could be an investor in our fund. And then we'd have to report out that information to them. And for a lot of them, it's because they have requirements around they need to invest in a certain number of ESG funds that hit XYZ requirements. We could fall into that category. And for others, it's just a lot of limited partners are now just needing to report it on their end too, because there has been regulations in Europe and in California that if you're a Fortune 500 company, I can't remember the exact threshold for when you need to report, but public companies over a certain size need to report their emissions, and we would be included in their Scope 3 emissions if they invested in us. Yeah.
Okay. That's so helpful. Thank you. And can I take it one more step on the P Corp side? Mm-hmm. So you do the reporting because you want to be P Corp certified, but then why do you want to have that? Like, is there a sort of bottom line motivation at the end of the day, or is it about the recruiting an image of your firm, or what are the possible benefits of doing this?
I think it's more for recruiting and branding purposes, because I think we have to pay to be considered for B Corp, so I don't think it helps our bottom line in that regard. So it's more for like branding and recruiting purposes. Because even our non-climate tech investors, our real estate portfolio companies, they also have to go through that process and be part of that B Corp. So even the non-climate side is still governed by pretty strict ESG regulation then. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Can you speak about why you decided to purchase issues from private equity standpoint and why started out at Goldman?
Why I started at Goldman is I needed a visa, to be blunt. So there aren't that many places that are willing to give an H-1B visa, right? And so it needed to be a bulge bracket bank or big tech. That was the only places that were going to do it. And for me personally, like I was an econ major, I like thinking about finance, and there are things that like I really loved about my time in banking and motivations to why I picked that versus tech. Things like I like numbers, so I like looking at Excel stuff. I still do. So that's why that made more sense for me. And when I was at Goldman, I covered natural resources because I kind of knew I wanted to do probably renewables things. I didn't know what that path would look like to get there. But natural resources, so looking at metals and mining companies, power and utilities, IPPs, chemicals, was sort of the clearest path for me to get to that end goal, probably, because understanding the people that we're selling the products into probably makes sense. And so that's kind of why I decided to go down that path. And then when I was at Goldman, just towards the end of it, was when, at the time when I recruited to go into private equity, there was the only private equity firm that existed at the time was called TPG Rise Fund. That was the only fund that existed that focused on kind of impact investing impact investing at the private equity level. There were like smaller funds that kind of lean more on the impact side of the investing versus kind of these big private equity names. But a new fund popped up, and that's the one I ended up at just as I was thinking about leaving Goldman. So it just felt pretty good timing. And then motivations for like why private capital versus like non-profits. That's a personality fit, honestly. Like I would find it quite frustrating, I think, working at a non-profit because I move fast, and that's just how my brain thinks. And like when you're in kind of the investing side, that's how deal flow works. It's just really quick, and you get to execute on your ideas very quickly. And that's not how a nonprofit is structured. And there's very valid reasons for why that's the case, but it doesn't fit my personality. So I always knew I was going to stay on the private business side.
Great. It's a great example of people who care about climate change end up taking lots and lots of different walks of life. And this is a message I keep pounding home to the Career Center for Innovation here, is that this is not all the sort of do-gooder types that are doing this. It's not that, this is a whole range of folks that are not just focused on the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I can think of two other people that graduate the same year as me at Brown, and we have taken very different paths and all kind of still go to the same conferences about climate tech.
Yeah.
Like one of them works at SBTI, which is the one that sets kind of the net zero targets. Another one, she now has started her own fund, but started more on the consulting side, and like kind of more educational side of climate tech stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. First, I'm sorry.
I was wondering if there are certain real estate markets that you guys specifically focus on for climate tech, and additionally, within the different classes of buildings, if there are any specific class or types of buildings that you think is most ripe for climate tech innovation.
Yeah. So the first part of the question was sectors within climate tech we look at?
Oh, I was thinking more like geographies.
Oh, yes. I would say most of our investments are in the US. In our climate tech portfolio, we have a couple of European investments and one in Latin America, but vast majority is in the US, mostly because that's where the team is based, and just like our own sourcing engine and like our network is all US based. We do actually have a few team members based in, like one is in the Middle East, and we have a few in Singapore as well. So we do get inbound from those sectors too. But part of it as well is that our limited partners a lot of them are real estate corporates, and most of them are based in the US. Some of them have footprint elsewhere in the world, but a lot of them are trying to tackle that US real estate, right? So the solutions based here are the ones that can obviously assist those corporates. So we're just also thinking about, we are also, they're technically our customers in some ways, so we have to respond to their needs too. That's also why we kind of look in the US. But one thing I've loved about Fifth Wall is that it is a very global firm, and the team, not just me, like half our team are immigrants from outside the US, so all of us think pretty globally, and I would say that's rare within the climate tech investing space. And then the ripe for disruption part, I actually think commercial buildings are probably the one that's the most. The residential side, we know some of the players that have, like Tesla that does EV chargers, right? As well as for individuals having electric cars, Sunrun for residential buildings. There are a lot of those examples. And yes, we should keep doing more of those things, but there's been some kind of inroads made there. I do think on the kind of beginning side, so doing better at the embodied carbon piece, that's where a lot of opportunity still is. Like carbon negative cement is not widely used today across any industry. So that's a great segment to highlight there. But then on the commercial side, it is just more complicated. So there are less solutions that exist right now. And so if you can crack it, I think there's a huge upside opportunity, but it will be more difficult probably to crack. Yeah.
So all these technical solutions across the lifespan of the building cost money, and as I understand from you, tenants across individuals and commercials are only marginally willing to pay for that. So the profit case is difficult to find.
Yes.
Business does it, but the reason why we don't see more profits is because the profit case in most cases doesn't exist. So we need some kind of a change to that market. One source of such change can be state intervention, and then there's the New York case, you see the regulatory out of it. Who cares if it's a profit case, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is the role and that's the way to change the market mechanism? Should you stay with that? Or should you do more IRA time, tax incentives? Should it pay half the cost of heat pumps? How do you see that kind of thing?
I honestly think all the above needs to happen because it needs to move so fast. So and also I think it probably depends on each exact segment again, because like calculating that ROI is different depending on the building, depending on if we're talking about a heat pump versus solar. So yes, I think regulation is necessary to drive a lot of those changes, particularly in the beginning, just to move those along a little bit. A lot of the challenges is that the bulk upfront cost is high. Like installing a heat pump is like $20,000 for an individual home. So of course, if you can reduce that upfront burn or cost, that'd be great. That can be done by government incentive. It can also be done by different business models. Like maybe it's that it's free to install, but you have to pay on a monthly subscription basis for that, whatever it may look like to pay off that heat pump. So those are kind of some ideas. Myself personally, I also am someone who, like all the portfolio companies or any company I've ever invested in, I firmly don't agree in a green premium personally. I don't think you should have to, you as an individual or a company, you should have to pay a premium to do the right thing. And so I really hate when companies assume that they're going to be able to charge a green premium. They can when they're like a Series A or seed company, very small. But once they pass that point, I'm like, you got to at least be break even with the existing solution, because it's not realistic from a profit perspective to expect someone to adopt something on a mass way if it's going to cost them that much more. It's like a self-tax then relative to their competitors. So yeah, I just don't think it's realistic to assume that we're going to pay a green premium in the mass market. So there's some ideas actually. It's that there are some companies that are like you can rent your roof to put in solar, and some companies will pay you as the building owner to rent your roof to put solar on your roof. Like it can actually generate revenue in some cases. That's rare, but there are some cases that that's the case.
I have another question for you. So energy efficiency is structured much differently than a solar or battery storage. So obviously, depending on the market mechanism, but I mean, how do you look at energy efficiency? It's seen as like the low-hanging fruit. It kind of pays for itself.
Yeah.
It certainly saves money, I suppose, for your residents. And yet the owner still has to pay for it, but it's still a different structure mechanism. So like if you could compare like energy efficiency, like do you look at that much in terms of like an investment opportunity? Or is that kind of like paired with these other technology options?
We do look at energy efficiency as kind of investment opportunity. Usually I think about splitting it up even more within energy efficiency, because it could be just like looking holistically at the building and thinking about all the different solutions for that. I've actually come across companies that specifically do like wall insulation or like insulate your pipes better through a variety of different ways. I think there was one company I came across where if that you can't have people in the building, but they will basically pump a solution through pipes so that it shows you where all the holes are in pipes. And it's fascinating how fast holes exist in those pipes as well. And so if you can like reseal all of that, and again, they have a solution where you just like spray into the pipe and it reseals everything automatically. But you can't do that if there's stuff going into the pipes, of course. So those are kind of very easy ways to increase kind of energy efficiency. But then other ones is like building automation systems is the one that people talk about all the time. So it's, as the day goes on, automatically changing of your blinds could be controlled by a building automation system. Lights turning on and off as you go into a building, automatic doors, all of those can be part of a building automation system, something that controls it all. I actually saw more of it in private equity. The existing ones are okay, but they're sort of old. Like Johnson & Controls they have one, for example. Siemens also has a solution. Honeywell has a solution. There hasn't been that much innovation in the last like 5 to 10 years in those. They work fine. But a lot of smaller companies trying to break in find it very difficult because you're not going to rip out your building automation system if the building's already operational and it's working fine. So that's like another challenge for thinking about how to scale some of those energy efficiency solutions. And if you look at the kind of broader landscape, a lot of them have struggled to go past the like 5 million in ARR mark. And they sort of get stuck there. And so actually a lot of them end up being private equity roll-up acquisition targets or a Honeywell acquisition target.
Francesca, can I ask you about how you and your firm think about filtering the opportunities that you have? You could imagine all kinds of ways that you could have mission creep in your firm, and in particular, of course, what you're doing, you have opportunities you're looking to, get a good return on investment, right? You've got to make money. That's the whole reason that your firm exists. But you could imagine being approached by firms that are, right in your wheelhouse, venture capital, climate stuff, the environmental benefit is very large, versus other places where, other opportunities where that environmental benefit gets kind of smaller and smaller to the point where, they're doing stuff that's like not climate related whatsoever. And yet some of those opportunities might be very profitable. And so how do you think about sort of the range of what you do and keeping some coherence to your mission space?
So when it comes to like filtering, so kind of that's start one. Our investment team, I want to say we have 30 people on the investment team at this point. So there's a lot of us, all sourcing, looking at different companies, filtering through a lot of those. Most of us do it by what we call like thesis deep dive work. So like as an example, I recently did one on mining tech. So any company in the mining space now gets funneled to me because I'm the one who did the research on it. Like I literally spoke to like the Colorado School of Mines professors for a few hours to like understand the geological implication of some of those kind of new technologies that are emerging. Because I don't have that background, I need to learn it. And then also I'm the one who segmented the space, thought about like this is where the opportunity is in my mind, the different companies by different categories, all of that. So that's kind of our natural filtering mechanism where the expert is in whatever that little subsegment is the one that would probably take a first look at something. And then if it was interesting enough, it kind of gets flagged up the chain, you do a little bit more work, and then until something gets killed or doesn't get killed, and you just keep going. There's like multiple different layers before we actually make the investment. And so then to answer kind of your second part on the environmental versus the money-making aspect, that's always obviously kind of, so not always, but sometimes contradicts each other. I would say that we have kind of a full investment committee process to make sure it's going to make money. And so also no one is going to take something to investment committee if they don't think it's going to grow 10 times from that perspective, right? And then on the environmental benefit side, so there's you can get yourself classed for something specific in the private markets where, I can't remember what, it's I want to say Article 9 fund, but I can't remember the exact number, which requires it hits a certain emission from every single investment. There's an emission threshold. We did not class ourselves actually as an Article 9 fund because and I genuinely believe this myself, is that there are a lot of enablement tools that are necessary to make the whole system work. You can't just be like, we're just only going to have solar on the roofs. You also need, okay, well, how are we going to control that solar and make sure it, twists with the sun? That requires software. The software in and of itself might not actually be reducing emissions, but it's necessary to make the whole system work. And sometimes those are vertically integrated companies, but still, sometimes they're separated out. So as an example, one of our portfolio companies is a company called EcoCart. If you are online shopping, sometimes they'll say this is the number of emissions associated with this purchase. Do you want to buy offsets? They're sort of that plug-in. They in and of itself aren't reducing emissions, but they are encouraging consumers to purchase carbon offsets that are high quality. Again, some funds probably wouldn't agree with that, but that's kind of how we segmented out the world. Would say the vast majority of our investments is 70% hardware, and hardware and deep tech is more emission reduction, and that's kind of how we split up the world.
So that's really helpful. I'm just thinking about as you say, nobody's going to take an opportunity to your investment committee unless it's going to, the profit and return is there.
Yeah.
At what stage, or maybe it's multiple stages, but at what stage is somebody asking the question of okay, but also, Francesca, explain to me why this company is actually climate related. Mm-hmm. The software one is a great example, right? Where
yep.
you could explain it, but
yep.
Who's asking that question? Is there somebody along the process?
So every fund I've been at kind of does it differently, but I guess the last two, FIFO and G2, the way we do it is, our climate tech team, everyone has spent their entire career focused on climate tech. So everyone sort of has a natural ability to judge that, but before I even bring something to investment committee, before I do too much work on it, if I get excited, I've had a couple of calls, know enough about the company to be excited, I will bring it up to my entire team just verbally, be like, hey, this is what they do, these are the things I want to go do diligence on, who wants to work on it with me? Right, that's how it usually goes. That's when someone would raise it, being like, I don't really understand what the climate story is here. Because ultimately as well, we need to be able to tell that story to our LPs, but also just broadly to the climate community. Because there are deals that are kind of on that borderline and controversial. So if we don't feel conviction as a team, it gets really difficult. Yeah.
Great.
I'll build on that. So do you ever take policy into consideration? Maybe some of these companies are not business savvy, or they're not aimed to make a lot of profit up front, but there's a policy that could be in the pipeline where all of a sudden this company could become a prime number one market leader for certain things. Is that in your investment team's consideration, or is it just looking at the business as is and as it functions?
We would consider market, it's we call market tailwinds. So if there are positive tailwinds coming up or headwinds, we will definitely include that as part of our investment memo. So it can be this, let's say, the IRA is coming down the pipeline. Oh my God, it's got a huge market tailwind. It's going to increase TAM by X dollars as an estimate, whatever it may be. So that's definitely part of it. But sometimes I would say I try not to do rely on it too much, because obviously it comes with politics and things move. We're in an election year, right? And so we try. You do obviously consider it, but if that's the only reason the company's going to grow, it's probably not going to be the strongest investment, just given like the cycles of politics in the country. Yeah.
So, green building technologies, I imagine most of them come out of the US, Europe, and China. If I was a venture capitalist in the space, I would imagine like affordable distributed between those. I understand that's not the case.
Yeah.
Aren't you concerned that technologies coming out of China will outcompete American technologies? And how come you're not in China?
So yeah, I mean, that's the question we always think about. So investing in China in general is quite challenging. And like a lot of funds have pulled out of China in the last 2 years, right? It is, and I grew up in Hong Kong, so it's like very top of mind for me. It's a very difficult space, country to invest in. A lot of it's government control. They can just take away things like that. At least here we have 4-year cycles. They have 10-day cycles if they so please, right? It's really difficult to kind of predict that in that way. So that's the first piece. And the other one is, can they outcompete? On a cost basis, probably, right? And we can see that with lithium-ion batteries that come out of China are like a lot cheaper than in the US. And we obviously, as a globe, outsource a lot of our manufacturing to China. We did the same, or we all did it. And so yeah, the cost basis is lower for a lot of these things. In the US, we have a lot of tariffs and things like that kind of blocking those things. And also the IRA reduces the cost basis too. So those are kind of things to help with that consideration. And so a lot of our investment thesis, like when I think about mining and the reason why we were so focused on it for a while is, well, a lot of the lithium's coming out of China. Where else in the world can we mine to make it so that we can be competitive? Or is there stuff that we already have in America that can be recycled? Because that's also part of the mining thesis. Like we did a solar panel recycling investment, for example. Recycle those panels. We don't need to rely on buying solar panels from China as much. So those are kind of all of the different considerations at play there. But yes, it is a kind of reality that like probably they will continue to be very cost competitive. I do think there's enough of a sentiment in the US, even amongst businesses, where like buying from the US or from Europe is a driver. Like a lot of them don't buy from China if they can on their supply chains. So that's like part of it. Then you also think the emission part. Transportation is really bad for the environment. Like you can't ship without there being pretty high emissions. So that's also part of the consideration if you are someone who reports on your ESG, because that might actually increase the cost depending on like how much your emissions are.
Do you see yourself ever switching to work for one of these companies themselves, perhaps one that not works for you all,
Great question. I don't know. I've always considered operating roles, like every time I've switched jobs, as like a maybe thing to do. I also think it would probably make me a better investor to at least do it for a little bit, because like, who am I to tell people when I'm sitting on a board being like, you should do this versus that? Like, I didn't ever done it myself. It's based on pattern recognition. So I do always think about it for myself. Again, this is a personality fit. Like, I like that I do one thesis for 3 to 6 months and then I get to do something completely different. My deal cycles are like 1 to 2 months long, so I get to look at a lot of different things all the time. Obviously in your operator, you go really deep on that one thing for years. So it's just kind of very different muscle. And I like the kind of pace of just learning something new all the time. Yeah.
Does Fifth Wall, and maybe I'm ignorant here, invest in real estate and then tech companies go into the real estate that they also own, or is it just focusing on the tech companies and they go out there and do stuff in real estate?
Just the tech company side. Yeah, we don't own. We don't even own the offices we live in. Yeah, so it's all we don't own any real estate. Mm-hmm. Our LPs do. Like some of our LPs are like the biggest developers, hotel owners like across the world. So it's like CBRE, Starwood, Hilton, Marriott, like all of those are LPs.
There must be a lot of synergies there.
Yeah.
There's another question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so my impression from like real estate asset managers is that they're looking for like a lot of emissions and regulatory solutions, like companies like Measurable, that will help them kind of reduce their emissions. So I feel like I've seen a lot of companies, or a lot of demand for that. from real estate asset managers, but what other types of trends do you see these like huge companies like StartUp or Brookfield going into?
Yeah. It's interesting because each of them sort of have different requirements. It also depends where they are on their decarbonization journey. So totally agree that a lot of them are looking for like these emission reduction carbon accounting solutions because they don't really know what to do yet. They're sort of at the beginning of their journey of like, all right, how much are we emitting? Like that's that step. And that's great that that's that first step they're taking. And then coming up with a plan, like all of that takes time, right? And then some of them are further along than that. They're like, okay, we've also, some of them maybe have already installed solar on their roofs and like have their own little microgrid in all of their buildings. And now are saying, all right, how do we reduce emissions to the next level than that? So some of our European LPs, for example, that's the camp they're in. So they're trying to figure out, all right, how do we make tenants stop using plastic in the buildings? Do we just like get rid of it and stop allowing it? There's just kind of, it depends where they are in sort of their journey. Would say a lot of the ones in the US are thinking about their energy usage right now. That's kind of the bulk of them. And the hotel LPs specifically are actually really focused on plastic. It's a huge problem for hotels specifically, because like even the hotel I'm at, I got given 4 bottles of water when I checked in, right? Like that's just what they do. And a lot of customers want that. And so it's tough for us to say, stop doing that to Hilton if their customer asks for it as well.
I think we just have time for one more question. Serena.
Yes, I would say that there are some companies that do that. So some of them, it's like it's included in them installing something, oftentimes, of like creating that business model altogether. So one example was a company called Sealed, where they basically created this system where it reduced took away the upfront cost of installing a heat pump in the individual home, and their solution was that would kind of reduce that whole barrier of entry in the upfront side. And then on the ongoing basis, they had pretty good prediction of the amount of energy savings the heat pump would get that house. And so they would charge that gap, basically. And that was how they like kind of solved that problem. So it's an incentive kind of in that way. I'm trying to think if there's any off the top of my head. I've come across one for plastic recycling. There was a company that used like Bitcoin to incentivize people to recycle all types of things at sports stadiums. So like you earned Bitcoin if you recycled, and like the sports stadium paid for that. Like that was an interesting solution. And yeah, those are the two off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are others. Yeah.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much for coming to visit us at Brown and for sharing all of your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want your slides, the 2 slides.
Yeah.
So